Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear student. My name is Dr. Muhammad Adnan Asgar, and today we are going to discuss detection of phase transitions by thermal analysis under the subject of advanced inorganic material chemistry. So, what are phase transitions? Actually, phase transition is a kind of transformation of a thermodynamic system from one phase of the matter to another by heat transfer or by sometime pressure. In this lectures, we will definitely emphasize the solid to solid phase transition materials. We know that there are many type of phase transitions. For example, if a molecule have a solid structure, it if it transform into its liquid, then we can say this is transformation from solid to liquid, and this is also the phase transition, and sometime liquid to vapor state, and sometime solid directly into vapors. But uh, we will study solid to solid phase transitions because it actually captured renowned interest owing to their prospective applications during last years. Among them, temperature dependent solid to solid structural phase transitions are not only important for searching the technologically potential materials, but it also helpful for the investigation of structure property relationships. So, the finding of phase transitions from solid to solid material is actually quite impressive. And how we can find this phase transition? Before we need to study, we better to have some experiences of phase transitions in solid materials. The important properties of the solid to solid phase transition is, among it is critical point or critical temperature. It is actually the specific temperature at which one phase of the material is transformed into another form, and this is known as critical temperature or critical point, and it is denoted with TC. For example, we have a molecule that have phase transition, and what would be the temperature or the phase transition point for that material? It is denoted with the TC and known as critical point. It is very important to learn about the critical point because below this temperature and above this temperature, the molecule have may have possess different structures. It is quite obvious from the structure determinations that below the phase, and we can also set this Curie temperature or TC temperature as a phase transition temperature. So below and above the phase transition materials, the temperature, the same crystal possesses different structures. For example, at high temperatures or above the phase transition temperature, a molecule may possess a disordered state, and below the phase transition point or TC, the molecule may ordered its atom and subsequently gives the more ordered structure. So it is quite important to learn the properties, to discuss the properties of different solid phase transition materials. Second one is the symmetry breaking. Symmetry breaking is actually also gives us nice information of different materials. For example, the high temperature phase, which is also denoted with HTP, contains usually more symmetry elements as compared to the low temperature phase LTP due to the spontaneous symmetry breaking, with the exception of certain accidental symmetries. There are definitely there are exceptions in symmetry breaking, but generally above the phase transition points, which is also known as high temperature phase, usually contains more symmetry elements as compared to low temperature phase. And we were very well familiar with the point groups. In our previous classes we have discussed the different point groups and space groups. There are 32 space groups and point groups. The diminished inversion center is actually important for numerous physical systems, particularly for ferroelectrics. So if a molecule have, it means that there are sometimes linear and non-linear geometries. So the based on the structures and the different symmetry operations present in the molecule, it gives different physical properties. We know that a molecule or a crystal possesses five type of symmetry elements. It may possess identity. Number two may be proper rotation. Number three, it may possess plane of symmetry. And number four, it may possess improper rotation. And number five, the last one is inversion center. A crystal may or may not possesses all type of symmetry operations and elements within its structure. So the based on the symmetry elements and symmetry operations, we can classify different properties of the materials, and we can discuss and compare the properties of one material with another. For example, in the case of phase transition materials, the lack of inversion center is quite important for the explanation of different physical systems, physical properties. Among them, which is ferroelectric, is very important. We know that as we have already discussed that the high temperature phase contain more symmetry elements, while the low temperature phase possesses less symmetry elements. This is the case. We can say this is a molecule H2 debicocl2 FeCl3H2O thrice. Debico means 1,4 di as a bicyclo 2,2,2 octane. It actually exhibits a superior switching contrast up to 25 and relatively large non-linear optical switch of 0.31 at about 280 Kelvin. This is actually a non-linear optical molecule which shows the non-linear optical properties at low temperature, where the symmetry operations or the symmetry breaking operations are quite low. It actually removes the inversion center, and we will get the structure like this. And this is the space is point group D2, and the high temperature phase, its point group is D2H. I do believe that you people are well familiar with the point groups, and you people are well familiar how to find point groups, because these lectures we have already delivered in 8th semester or in 4th semester of MSc. These are the different symmetry elements and the symmetry operations that I had discussed previously. This is the inversion center. Actually, inversion center is denoted with I, and each point moves through a common central point to a position opposite and equivalent. Here we can set this. It is actually a point in the middle of the molecule. Here we can see it is actually a point in the middle of the molecule from where we can move from to any towards any atom in the space. For example, I would like to move this side, and definitely there is a hydrogen atom. So if I found an atom in a space, and I should have to move on the opposite side of that middle point. So if I found the same atom over there, then we can say there is inversion center, otherwise there is no inversion center. And here we can say there is inversion center in this molecule, and there is also inversion center, and but in the case of triangle there is no inversion center, because if we assume this molecule, and I assume there is a dot in the middle of the molecule, and I would like to move upward to upward from that middle point, and I will found one, for example, one molecule, one atom, specific atom, but subsequently on the other side of the that atom, I should have to move on same, I should have to travel the same distance, but there is no such type of atom is present on the opposite side. It means there is no inversion center in this molecule. Why so important to detect phase transitions? Because phase transition materials have many applications. The phase transition materials may used as a pyroelectric materials. It also used as an infrared detectors. There are ferromagnetic materials and capacitors as well. And recently we have found there is a semiconductor properties in phase transition materials, while non-linear optical switches along with non-volatile memories and ferroelectric materials are quite important applications of the phase transition materials. And in recent 5 years, a new applications have also discovered, which is the actually thermal energy storage property of the phase transition materials. It means that phase transition materials have the ability to store thermal energy, and it can subsequently release while applying some conditions to that particular molecule. So there are many different applications of the phase transition materials. How DSC and TGA help us to explore phase transitions? So actually thermal analysis is quite important to explore the different properties of the materials. For example, here is an example: N-methyl pyrrolidinium hydrogen tartrate. It is actually an above room temperature order disorder molecular switchable dielectric materials. We can say that this is actually the two structures. A structure is at low temperature phase, while B structure at high temperature phase. The molecules are same in the low temperature phase and high temperature phase, but if you observe more clearly, if you observe more closely, you can find a quite large difference between the two structures, because here we can say this nitrogen is actually delocalized over two spaces, here and here. We can say this is actually disordered state of the hydrogen. Same is the case with the carbon of the ring carbons. We can say there are different positions of the carbon atoms. They are actually vibrating so strongly that it is believed that this atom is actually found on the two sides immediately. So this is actually order and the disorder state of the same material. It is actually the mechanism of this phase transition, but how we can find the phase transition in this material? So in this regard, our thermal analysis would help us to find out the phase transition. If we perform the diffraction scanning calorimetry DSC, then we can observe that during heating and cooling there is an thermal anomaly, and it's in heating at about 317 Kelvin, while in the case of cooling it's about at 314 Kelvin. So there is a difference of about 3 Kelvin between heating and cooling. We can say this is actually thermal change, and This might be the uh, critical temperature, which we have discussed already and denoted with TC. Here we can see that, and this is actually the phase transition point of the material. This below this temperature, the structure would be treated as low temperature phase, while above this temperature, the structure of the molecule would be designated as high temperature phase. This is also confirmed by thermogravimetric analysis (TGA). In TGA, we can observe that there is no change in mass. We can find that up to this temperature, there is no significant decrease in the mass of the that molecule, that sample, but at the temperature at about 317 degrees Celsius, there is a little temperature fluctuation is observed. This temperature fluctuation actually the indication of existence of phase transition in this molecule. This would be the actually indication that the thermal analysis can help us to explore the phase transition in that type of materials. Example, it is actually international publication, and it is a research that is published in Journal of Material Chemistry C. It is the Royal Society of Chemistry. The topic was order disorder phase transition coupled with torsion in tri-N-butyl ammonium trichloroacetate. This is actually the compound, which is the tri-N-butyl ammonium trichloroacetate, TABAT. It is actually a very simple salt which is formed by the hydrothermal method. In this hydrothermal method, the author synthesized this compound by mixing the tributyl amine with trichloroacetic acid. They mix both of the reactants in a beaker and then heated the beaker for 3 hours at about 50 degrees Celsius and with constant stirring. After getting homogeneous and transparent solution of these two reactants named tri-N-butyl amine as well as trichloroacetic acid, the mixture then transferred to the Teflon lined autoclave, which is shown here. This mixture of solution is transferred to the Teflon, and this Teflon is subsequently inserted in the stainless steel container, and then it is sealed properly and then put into the heating oven at about 120 degrees Celsius for 7 days. After 7 days of slow cooling process, the authors received very nice needle shaped crystals of this tri-N-butyl ammonium trichloroacetate. So, what would be the benefit of these materials in chemistry? To understand the concept behind their applications and the importance of this material, it is therefore subjected to the different characterizing techniques, and it is moreover subjected to the single crystal diffractometer to study the exact structure of the compound that would be helpful for us to find out the mechanism and the properties behind this compound. For example, this is actually the asymmetric unit of this compound, in which trichloroacetate is actually make a bond with the ammonium part of the tri-N-butyl ammonium. So here we can see in the picture C and D, and we can even observe the bond distance between the anions as well as cations. So the word order disorder is actually due to the LTP means low temperature phase and HTP means high temperature phase. How would we know this is LTP and HTP? Because when we subjected this material in an diffraction scanning calorimetry, which is named DSC internationally, we have observed heat anomalies in the temperature region of 194 to 196 Kelvin. Here in this picture we can clearly observe heat anomalies while heating and cooling at 196 and 194.5 Kelvin subsequently. This heat change is actually the indication of phase transition, solid to solid phase transition. What does it mean? It means that this solid compound is actually transform its solid phase into an other solid phase. It means that the both phases are actually solid phases, but the structure of the compound is quite different at high temperature phase as well as at low temperature phase. And what we have observed when we collect the data of their single crystal studies at above the phase transition point and below the phase transition point. Actually, above the phase transition point would be treated as high temperature phase, while below the phase transition point would be treated as below a low temperature phase, LTP. So when we collected the crystal data of same crystal at different temperatures named high temperature and low temperature, we observed that below phase transition point, which is low temperature phase, all the oxygen, the red one is the oxygen molecule, while the black one is the carbon, while the green one is the chlorine. The green one are actually, all the atoms are actually in ordered state. So when it jumps from low temperature phase to high temperature phase, the chlorine molecules are actually highly disordered and occupies two positions simultaneously. So the single crystal diffractometer actually describe that this molecule is highly disordered, and this is actually the mechanism behind this phase transition, and this mechanism is depicted and picturized by the help of variable temperature single crystal diffractometer. But the confirmation and the exploration of this phase transition is actually done by using a thermal technique, which is the diffraction scanning calorimetry. And in picture B we can see that this is actually the different heating rates. It is actually 2 Kelvin per minute. This blue one is actually 5 Kelvin per minute, and the this actually dark color is of 10 Kelvin per minute. So different heating rates may shift the position of peaks to some extent, but it should be observed at the same temperature premises. This was all about this compound. Now let's talk about the another example. The, the paper was triethyl ammonium picrate, an above room temperature phase transition material to switch quadratic nonlinear optical properties. This molecule is actually compound is prepared by also using hydrothermal treatment, in which triethyl ammonium amine is actually mixed with picric acid. So after mixing both of the reactants in beaker, Then after getting the transparent solution is then transferred into the for the hydrothermal treatment into an autoclave. So this autoclave is also placed for 3 to 4 days at about 100 degrees Celsius, and after that we will able to get the nice yellow colored crystals of this compound triethyl ammonium picrate. So after getting this nice crystals, it is therefore important to explore is there any kind of phase transition in this molecule is present or not. Then we just subjected this molecule in diffraction scanning calorimetry. As we can see that there is a clear uh, peaks of diffraction scanning calorimetry at about 320 Kelvin, as well as in cooling process at about 312 Kelvin. It is about near room temperature, so we can say this is actually above room temperature. So this is the compound which is actually explored with the help of thermal technique, which is the diffraction scanning calorimetry. But this compound would be helpful in many different applications. We can study the even quadratic nonlinear optical properties of this compound, and if the compounds have these kind of properties above room temperature, then it would be more important to learn. This is actually done by the help of hydrothermal treatment, and moreover the more important thing is actually the thermal analysis which is carried out to this material, and it would be quite helpful for us to explore the exact phase transition point of this compound. Thank you very much.